The pregnant black woman was cleaning the counter of the small restaurant, unaware of what would happen. Suddenly, the leader of the bikers entered and confessed his feelings. Everything changed. Sarah stood behind the worn-out counter, wiping it with a damp cloth. The diner's old vinyl stools were empty, and the overhead lights buzzed with a faint hum. She was 8 months pregnant, and her back felt sore. The place had stayed quiet for most of the evening. She glanced at the door, hoping for 1 or 2 late-night travelers. Her savings were low, and she needed every dollar. Her belly felt heavy, and she worried the baby would sense her stress. She tried to steady her breathing and focus on the task at hand. Outside, engines rumbled. The sound grew louder and then stopped. She raised her head and stared at the door. A group of bikers entered, 2 men and a woman, all wearing leather jackets. They moved in without a greeting. One took a seat near the jukebox, another leaned against the wall, and the third settled at a table by the window. They smelled like cigarettes and sweat. Sarah tried to keep her face neutral. She did not want trouble. "Coffee?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice steady. She reached for the pot even before anyone answered. Her hand shook slightly. The diner felt warmer than before. She stepped toward the biker near the jukebox, holding a mug. He gave her a hard look and said nothing, but he did not refuse. She poured the coffee. He took it without a thank you. The other 2 whispered between themselves. Sarah's heart beat fast. She pretended not to notice their stares. She glanced at the clock. It was late, and if these were the same bikers from before, she would have to watch the cash register. Last time, a few bills had vanished. She clenched her jaw and thought about her baby. She did not want any confrontation. She just wanted them to leave quietly and pay for what they took. The biker at the table beckoned. Sarah approached. He nodded at the menu overhead. "Got any pie?" he asked. His voice was low, rough. Sarah nodded. She turned and went behind the counter, cutting a slice of the leftover apple pie. It was not fresh, but it was all she had. She placed it in front of him, along with a fork. He eyed her belly. She noticed and tightened her grip on the apron strings. "How far along?" he asked, chewing slowly. She swallowed and answered, "Almost 8 months." He grunted, said nothing more, and kept eating. Sarah stepped back, returning to the counter. Her legs felt weak. She tried to stand tall, but her shoulders felt tense. The biker at the jukebox tapped a few times on the machine's side, but no music came. He turned to the one by the window. "This place is a dump," he said loudly, making sure Sarah could hear. She pretended to be busy rinsing a mug. Her eyes flicked to the register. It was partly open. She hoped they would pay tonight. She did not have the energy to argue. The door swung open again. This time, a tall figure stood there. Sarah recognized him by the patch on his jacket. He was the leader, the one called Jack. He stepped inside, boots scuffing the floor. The other bikers fell silent. Jack walked toward the counter. His presence was different. He was not loud. He did not laugh. He stared at Sarah without blinking. She tried to hold his gaze but failed. Jack spoke in a calm tone. "You're still open," he said, stating the obvious. Sarah nodded. Her voice caught in her throat. He took a seat on a stool, elbows on the counter. He looked at her face, then at her belly. His eyes lingered there for a moment. Sarah's heart pounded, and she did not know why. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a few bills, placing them on the counter. "Coffee," he said. Sarah poured him a cup, careful not to spill. She noticed the other bikers watching, waiting for some cue from their leader. Jack sipped quietly, then placed the mug down. One of the other bikers walked over. He stood behind Jack, arms folded, and smirked at Sarah. Jack raised a hand slightly, and the biker stepped back, as if an unspoken order had passed between them. Sarah tried to breathe normally. Jack spoke again, his voice steady and low. "We're going to be around here more often," he said. "We need a spot to meet. This place is convenient." Sarah's throat went dry. She wanted to say no, to tell them to leave, but the fear pressed down on her. She could not risk angering them. She imagined them returning night after night, scaring away paying customers, taking whatever they wanted. She pressed her hand against her belly, feeling the baby move. She had to be careful. She managed to form words. "I don't have a problem with you buying coffee or pie," she said, forcing a calm tone. "But I can't afford any more trouble. I'm barely getting by." Her voice sounded smaller than she intended. Jack looked at her with no visible reaction. "We won't break anything," he said. "We just need a place to talk. Some of my people pass through here. We'll come and go, that's all." He paused. "You'll serve us." Sarah tried to keep her eyes on him, but fear made her glance down. She asked, "And if I refuse?" The room felt heavier. The other bikers watched with interest. Jack did not raise his voice. "That wouldn't help you," he said. "We're not asking for much." Sarah nodded slowly. She felt trapped. She wiped her palms on her apron and stepped back. The other bikers relaxed a bit. One muttered something and sat down again. They did not laugh. They just settled into the diner as if it belonged to them. Jack tapped the counter. "I might come by alone later," he said. "We'll see how this goes." Sarah did not respond. She tried to keep her face blank. She thought about the money Jack had placed on the counter. It was a small amount, but at least it was something. She slipped it into the register and closed it firmly. After a few minutes, Jack stood up. "We're done here," he said quietly. The others got up and followed him out. Their boots clacked on the worn floor. The door swung closed, leaving Sarah alone with the hum of the lights and the lingering smell of their leather. She locked the door and turned off a few lights. She stood still for a moment, pressing a hand to her back. Her baby moved again, and she felt a slight ache in her legs. She tried to calm her breathing. She wondered what would happen next time they came. She did not know how long she could hold on. But for now, at least tonight, they had left without causing more damage. Sarah walked slowly to the small back room where she slept. She glanced at the photo of her husband tacked to the wall. The edges were curling. She did not touch it. She turned off the final light and settled onto the narrow bed, trying not to think about what tomorrow might bring. Sarah woke up early the next day, feeling stiff and tired. Her back hurt when she got up from the narrow cot in the storeroom. She rubbed her eyes, walked out into the empty diner, and flipped on the lights. The floorboards creaked. She checked the register. She had made only a few dollars last night. She sighed and placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby shift. She thought about the bikers, their words, and the uneasy agreement forced on her. Outside, the sky was still dark. A single truck passed by, its headlights sweeping through the diner's front window. Sarah set the coffee machine to brew. She wiped the counter and tried to make the place look presentable. A cup here, a plate there. She glanced at the empty booths. She wanted some quiet customers. Maybe a couple of travelers would stop in for eggs and toast. She needed the income. The door opened without warning. A few of the same bikers stepped in. She recognized the man who had asked about pie. He wore the same jacket, and his gaze drifted around the room as if checking for something. Another biker followed. This one had a scar on his chin and fingerless gloves. They took seats at a booth, ignoring her greeting. Sarah poured coffee and brought it over. Neither of them thanked her. They leaned back and talked in low voices. She could not catch much, but she recognized the tone. They sounded like men waiting for something or someone. She left them alone and returned to the counter. A few minutes later, an older couple entered. They looked tired, probably travelers from the highway. Sarah tried a warm smile. "Morning," she said softly. The man nodded. The woman asked for scrambled eggs and orange juice. Sarah set to work on the small grill behind the counter. She cracked 2 eggs. The sizzle filled the air. She poured juice and set out silverware. She tried not to look at the bikers. One of the bikers stood up and walked toward the couple's table. He stopped a few feet away, watching them. The couple grew uneasy. The man shifted in his seat. "Problem?" he asked. The biker smirked. "Just looking," he said. He took a step closer, and Sarah clenched her jaw. She did not want to fight. She needed these paying customers to stay. She carried the plates over and placed the eggs and toast on the table. She looked at the biker. "They're just passing through. she said. They'll eat and go. The biker shrugged. Sure, he said. He turned away but walked slow, making his presence clear. The couple ate quickly, barely tasting their food. They left cash on the table and hurried out. Sarah picked up the bills and placed them in the register, feeling relieved they had not fled without paying. The other biker at the booth called over, "Hey, got any bacon?" Sarah nodded. She fried a few strips and served them on a plate with some bread. He ate in silence. She stood behind the counter, trying not to look nervous. More time passed and the door swung open again. Jack stepped in. He was alone now, without the larger group. He glanced at the two bikers, said nothing, and went straight to the counter. Sarah's heart rate picked up. She poured him coffee before he asked. Jack took a sip, kept his eyes on the mug. "It's quiet here," he said. Sarah nodded. "In the mornings, yes," she said. "If people see the bikes, they might not stop. I need customers." Jack placed a few bills on the counter. "We're not stealing from you," he said. His voice was low but firm. "You got that?" Sarah looked at the money. It did not make up for what was lost last time. Still, she nodded. "All right," she said. "But last night some of your guys left without paying. My register's lighter." One of the bikers at the booth spoke up. "I paid for my coffee," he said, grinning. The other chuckled. Jack lifted his head and stared at them. The grins faded. They looked away, focusing on their plates and mugs. Sarah noticed the subtle shift. Jack seemed to have control over them, even without words. Jack tapped his finger on the counter. "We'll make sure it doesn't happen again," he said. Sarah wanted to believe him, but she remembered the tension from last night. Footsteps sounded outside. A lone traveler with a backpack entered. He looked around, saw the bikers, and hesitated. Sarah forced a neutral tone. "Help you?" she asked, trying to make him feel welcome. He approached the counter. "Just coffee to go," he said quietly. Sarah prepared a paper cup, and the traveler placed some coins on the counter. He kept his eyes down and left in a hurry. Sarah watched him go, frustrated that customers felt intimidated. Jack noticed. "We don't stay all day," he said, as if offering a solution. "Your people can come when we're gone." Sarah clenched her jaw. "That doesn't help much," she said. "I need steady customers, not just after you leave." Jack stood up. He looked around the diner. The place was old, the paint peeling, the seats torn in places. He seemed to consider something, but he did not share his thoughts. Instead, he looked back at her. "We'll be around," he said. "Just make sure to keep the coffee hot." Sarah nodded, though inside she felt tense. As Jack turned to leave, one of the bikers made a small gesture, pulling a couple of dollar bills from his pocket and placing them on the table. It was not enough to cover everything. Sarah sighed. At least it was something. They walked out together, leaving Sarah alone in the quiet again. She checked the money in the register. It was still too little. She needed to find a way to keep the diner going. She leaned on the counter, feeling her lower back ache. She wondered if this was all going to get worse. The baby shifted and she pressed a hand against her belly, trying to find some calm. A truck rumbled by outside but did not stop. Sarah took a deep breath and started wiping tables again. She changed the pot of coffee and stacked some clean cups. The morning sunlight filtered through the dusty window, showing the place as it was, old, struggling, and now caught in the middle of something she could not control. She reached under the counter and took out a small rag to polish the dull chrome on the stool tops. She focused on the simple tasks. The smell of coffee and bacon lingered. She stood there, waiting, not sure who would walk in next. This would be her life for now. She had to survive. Maybe Jack would keep his word, maybe not. She thought about closing the diner for a day or two, but she had no other source of income. She needed these tiny earnings. She had no choice but to deal with the situation as it was. Sarah continued to work silently, preparing for lunchtime, hoping to get at least one or two normal customers. She tried not to imagine what would happen if the bikers decided to come back every day. She decided to wait and see. She would not run just yet. Sarah spent the next few hours in uneasy quiet. After the bikers left, only one more traveler stopped by for a quick meal. She made a small sale, just enough to cover some basic supplies. Around midday, she stepped outside for a moment and inhaled the fresh air. The road was empty. The sun was high and the pavement felt hot. She wiped her forehead and returned inside, locking the door for a brief break. She sat on a stool, legs aching, hand on her belly. She thought about the bikers, about Jack, and about her dwindling cash. Later, she opened again. A pair of truckers came in near the afternoon, ordered sandwiches, and left quickly. She noticed they looked uneasy when they saw the faint tire marks outside, as if guessing who had been around. She cleaned up after they left, stacking plates and wiping crumbs. The day passed slowly. Her nerves stayed on edge. As dusk approached, Sarah felt the air grow heavier. She was not sure if the bikers would return at night, but she prepared for it. She refilled the coffee machine, checked her limited stock of pie and bread, and tried to keep her mind clear. She told herself to remain calm. She needed to protect this place. This diner was all she had left. The door creaked open. She looked up, expecting more bikers, but instead she saw a familiar face. Her husband. He stood there in his old jacket, looking thinner and tired, but with that same crooked grin. Sarah froze. She had not seen him in months. He had left her when he found out about the baby, taking her savings. Now he stepped forward, brushing dust off his sleeves as if nothing had happened. "Sarah," he said, eyes drifting to her belly. "You're looking far along." She clenched her jaw. Her heart pounded. "What do you want?" she asked, not hiding her anger. She felt betrayed, cornered, and confused. She glanced at the door, half expecting the bikers to show up right now. He leaned against a booth. "I came back," he said. "Maybe we can fix things. You know, for the baby's sake." Sarah scoffed. "You left me with nothing. Why would I trust you now?" He held up his hands. "I know I messed up. I got in trouble, owed money, but I've got a plan now. If we just work together, maybe we can start over." Sarah narrowed her eyes. "What's this about money? Did you owe the bikers?" She thought about Jack's group. The timing felt suspicious. He shifted his weight and lowered his voice. "Look, I might owe some people. They might be those guys hanging around, but I figured if we—" The door opened again. Jack entered, alone. He walked toward the counter and stopped a few steps behind Sarah's husband. His presence changed the air. Her husband turned around and faced Jack, going tense. Sarah's heart sank. She realized they knew each other. Jack said nothing at first. He looked from one to the other, then spoke quietly. "I see you made it back," he said to the husband. "Took you long enough?" Sarah's husband tried to sound confident. "I'm here to make things right," he said. "We can settle this. No need to involve her." Jack stared at him, then at Sarah. "You dragged her into this when you ran off with her money," Jack said, voice steady. "We know everything. Don't pretend you're here for a family reunion." Sarah stood behind the counter, gripping it with both hands. "Wait," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "You two know each other? You knew about this?" Jack met her eyes. "We knew he was out there," he said. "We waited for him to show himself. He owes us, and he put you in a bad spot." Her husband raised his voice. "I'm here now, aren't I?" He turned to Sarah. "Help me out. Let's pay them off somehow. I'll stick around this time." Sarah felt anger rising. "You think I'll just forgive and forget? After what you did? After leaving me pregnant and broke?" She could hear her heartbeat in her ears. She could not believe his nerve. Jack stepped closer, cutting into their space. "We're done with his excuses," he said. "He comes up with the money he owes, or there are consequences. That's not your problem, Sarah." He said her name flatly, as if trying to keep her out of it. Sarah felt trapped. "It is my problem if you keep using my diner as your base," she said. "I can't run a business like this. I can't have you chasing him here." Her husband tried to place a hand on her arm. She pulled away. "Sarah, come on," he said, sounding desperate. "We can figure something out. Just let me stay a while. Let me hide out until I fix this. Jack scowled. Hide out? That's not happening here. We're not your shelter. Sarah felt a tear of frustration form, but she blinked it away. She would not cry. Get out, she said to her husband. You left me. You don't get to walk back in and ask for my help. Just go. He looked shocked. Sarah, think about the baby, he said. You need me. She shook her head. No, I don't. She pointed to the door. Leave. He hesitated. Jack stood still, arms crossed, waiting. Sarah's husband realized he was outnumbered. He backed away toward the door, throwing one last pleading look at Sarah. She did not budge. He stepped outside into the fading light. Jack faced her, quieter now. He leaned on the counter, looking at the empty diner. We didn't mean for you to get caught in this mess, he said. He owes us, not you. Sarah exhaled slowly. But he dragged you here, she said, and you decided to settle in. Jack nodded, pressing his lips into a thin line. We need a place to meet, and this diner is convenient. He paused, then added, It's just business. She tapped her fingers on the counter. And what about last night? Stealing from me, scaring customers? Jack looked at the floor, then back at her. I told them not to do that again, he said. We're not out to ruin your place, but we need to be here, at least for now. Sarah's chest felt tight. She could not trust him fully. He was still part of the problem. She needed this diner to survive. She folded her arms over her belly, feeling the baby move again. She took a step back. I can't handle this stress, she said. I can't keep losing customers. I need you to understand that. Jack tilted his head. I understand, he said. I'll come by alone sometimes. Maybe we figure something out. But the group will be around. That's not changing yet. Sarah wondered what figure something out meant. She wanted to tell him to leave and never return. But she feared what would happen if she pushed too hard. The diner was all she had, and the road was lonely at night. She felt cornered. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small amount of cash, placing it on the counter. For tonight, he said. No one will bother you this evening. I'll talk to them. Sarah looked at the money, then at him. Fine, she said, not sure what else to say. She took the money and put it into the register. It was not much, but it was better than nothing. Jack turned toward the door. I'll be back, he said. Not now, but soon. He stepped outside, letting the door close behind him. The room felt empty again. Sarah walked to the door and locked it. She turned off the main lights, leaving only a dim bulb glowing. She could still smell the faint odor of leather and sweat. She sat down at a booth, her legs tired, her mind racing. She thought about her husband Jack and the baby. She felt alone. She stayed there a few minutes before going to the back to rest. She would need her strength. Tomorrow was uncertain. She pressed a hand against her belly again, trying to calm her breathing. She had to survive this. She would deal with whatever came next, one day at a time. Sarah stood behind the counter the next morning, feeling the ache in her feet. The diner was quiet again. She kept the lights dim to save on electricity. Outside, the sky was gray. She brewed a fresh pot of coffee, hoping for a few customers who might pay cash without trouble. She sliced some bread and wiped the tables, checking the door every few minutes. Around mid-morning, the door opened. Sarah froze, expecting the bikers, but instead Jack stood there alone. He carried a small box under one arm. She tensed. She had not expected to see him so early. Morning, Jack said, placing the box on the counter. He kept his voice low, face calm. I brought you some supplies. Flour, sugar, a few other things. You said you needed customers. Can't do that if you run out of food. Sarah eyed the box. Why? She asked. Her tone was flat. She did not want to show gratitude yet. You think this makes it easier for me to deal with your group? Jack shrugged. I told them to give you space. We might be here sometimes, but we won't scare off everyone. I can't promise perfection, but I can try. She looked at the flour and sugar. Her stock had been running low. She hated to admit it, but this helped. Fine, she said. I'll use it." She avoided thanking him. She did not trust him that far. Jack leaned on the counter. "You sleep okay?" he asked. Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Why would you care?" He said nothing for a moment. "I know it's not ideal," he said, "but I'm trying to keep the trouble off you. Your husband's problems are with us, not you." Sarah felt her muscles tighten at the mention of her husband. "He's not my husband anymore," she said. "He left me. I don't owe him anything, and I don't owe you anything either." Jack studied her face. "Understood." He looked around the diner. "You got eggs? I could eat something." Sarah hesitated. She needed customers, even if it was him. She nodded and stepped to the grill. She cracked 2 eggs, fried them, and placed them on a plate with toast. She set it in front of Jack and poured him coffee. He paid without complaint. They ate in silence for a while, Jack picking at the food, Sarah sipping coffee from behind the counter. The quiet was broken by the door opening again. 2 bikers walked in. Sarah recognized them from before. They paused, seeing Jack already there, and approached slowly. One of them spoke, voice low. "Boss, we got word the old man is sniffing around again. He's trying to borrow money to pay back what he owes." Jack kept his eyes on his plate. "I told him to deal with it, didn't I?" The biker nodded. "Yes, but he's persistent. Wants to talk again, maybe here." Sarah's stomach clenched. She had hoped that man would stay away. She felt anger boiling inside. She turned her back and wiped the counter, not wanting to interrupt. Jack finished his food. "If he shows up, we'll handle it outside, not inside. Understood?" The biker nodded and glanced at Sarah. She pretended not to notice. They took a booth and sat quietly, not ordering anything. Sarah felt tension rise again. The presence of these men would scare off new customers. She walked over, hands on her hips. "If you're not ordering, fine," she said, keeping her voice steady. "But don't cause trouble." The bikers looked at Jack, waiting. Jack nodded. "We'll keep it calm," he said. "We're here for a meeting, that's all." He reached into his pocket and placed a few bills on the table. "For the space," he said to Sarah. She took the money and placed it in the register. It was not much, but it was better than nothing. Half an hour passed. One trucker stopped in for coffee and left quickly, eyeing the bikers with suspicion. Sarah took his payment and watched him go. She knew the reputation of this place would suffer. Word would spread that bikers camped out here. That would hurt her business. But what could she do? Suddenly, the door opened again. Her husband stood there, breathing hard, sweat on his forehead. He looked at Jack and the bikers, then at Sarah. "I need to talk," he said, voice shaking. Sarah's heart pounded. "No," she said. "We have nothing to say." She tried to keep her voice firm. He ignored her, looking at Jack. "I'm trying to get the money, all right? Just give me a few more days. Don't drag Sarah into this. She's got nothing." Jack stood up, face neutral. "You showed up here again. That's on you." He stepped away from the booth and moved toward the door. "We can talk outside, not in here." The husband glanced at Sarah, but she said nothing. He followed Jack out, with one of the bikers trailing behind. Sarah stood still, listening to the muffled voices outside. She heard raised tones, but not the words. Her legs felt weak. She moved behind the counter, pretending to clean mugs. After a few minutes, the men returned. Jack's face showed no anger, just a flat calm. Her husband looked nervous, running a hand through his hair. "Just a bit more time," he said again. Jack ignored the pleas and looked at Sarah. "He's out of excuses," he said. "He wants to hide here." I said no. Sarah nodded. "He can't stay here," she said firmly. "He made his choice when he left." Her husband glared at her, mouth open as if to protest, but Jack raised a hand. The biker who followed them in stepped forward. "Boss, we should handle this elsewhere," he said. "No need to mess up the diner." Jack agreed. "Outside," he said. He looked at Sarah's husband, then tilted his head toward the door. "Let's go." They left again, and Sarah waited, tense. This time, they stayed outside longer. She heard muffled arguing, a thud, and then silence. When Jack returned, he was alone. The biker stayed outside and her husband was nowhere to be seen. She stared at Jack. "Where is he?" she asked, voice low. Jack shrugged. "He'll turn up," he said. "He's scared. He ran off." He approached the counter and lowered his voice. "We didn't hurt him. He just tried to pull a fast one, so he took off." Sarah believed him, or tried to. She had no reason to trust anyone here, but what choice did she have? "I don't want him coming back," she said. "I can't handle that." Jack nodded. "I understand. We don't want him around either. He owes us, but if he won't pay, we have no reason to hang around him." He looked at the clock. "We'll be leaving soon." Sarah stood there, arms crossed, heart still pounding. "Good," she said. "I need normal customers. I need to run this diner." Jack paused. "I'm trying to help you," he said. "I brought supplies. I kept them from making more trouble inside. Doesn't that count for something?" Sarah met his eyes. "It's something," she admitted. "But I still want you gone. No offense, but your presence scares people." Jack nodded slowly. "Fair enough. I'll try to come by alone more often. The others will come less." He turned to leave. "Don't close the place down," he said over his shoulder. "It would be a shame." She said nothing. After he stepped out, the diner felt hollow. She checked the money in the register. It was still too little, but at least she had flour and sugar now. Maybe she could make something fresh, maybe a pie or two to attract travelers. She swallowed, trying not to feel desperate. Outside, she heard the motorcycles start up. The roar faded as they rode away. Sarah stood by the window, watching the empty road again. She touched her belly and felt a small movement. She took a deep breath. For now, there were no bikers inside, no husband. She was alone with the diner and her unborn child. She wiped a table, checked her supplies, and thought about the next few days. If Jack kept his word, maybe it would get a bit easier. She had to trust something, or at least try to get by. She turned on the radio quietly, just static, then turned it off. The silence would have to do. She prepared coffee again and waited, hoping for one decent customer before dark. Sarah kept the diner open through the late afternoon, serving a few sandwiches and cups of coffee to 2 passing travelers. The bikers did not return right away. She moved slowly behind the counter, restocking cups and wiping crumbs. The flour and sugar Jack had brought helped her bake a small batch of biscuits. She set them on a plate under a glass cover, hoping the smell might draw someone in. As early evening approached, the sky outside darkened. The road was quiet. She thought about closing early, but hesitated. She needed every chance to earn money. Suddenly the door opened. Jack entered alone again. He did not say hello. He approached the counter, tapping the stool before sitting down. "Still open?" he asked, eyeing the biscuits. Sarah nodded. "For now," she said. "I can't afford to close." He took a biscuit, bit into it, and gave a small nod of approval. "Not bad," he said. He placed some bills on the counter. She took them without comment. A few minutes passed in silence. Then the door opened again. This time, it was not just 2 or 3 bikers, but 4. They wore similar jackets, their eyes scanning the diner. Sarah stiffened. This was a larger presence than before. They stepped in carefully, as if expecting trouble. One of them, a man with a thick beard, approached Jack. "We need to talk," he said, voice low. Jack did not invite him to sit. "We're talking," he replied, keeping his tone calm. The bearded biker glanced at Sarah. She caught the look and frowned. "If you're here, order something or leave," she said. Her voice was steady, though her stomach churned. She had enough of them crowding the place. The biker ignored her. He looked at Jack. "Some of the guys think you're getting too close here. We're supposed to be running the show. Instead, we're babysitting a diner." Jack's jaw tightened. "We're using this place as a base. That's the plan. You got a problem with it?" Sarah felt tension build. She wanted them out. She leaned forward. "You're not running anything here. I serve coffee, that's it," she said firmly. "You want to talk? Fine. But don't scare off my customers." The bearded biker smiled coldly. "Customers? You see any customers here?" He spread his arms, showing the empty diner. Sarah clenched her teeth. They don't come because they see you guys hanging around. You think you're helping yourselves by making this place look dangerous? You'll never meet anyone worth dealing with if they stay away. Jack turned his head slightly. He stared at Sarah as if surprised she would speak up. The other bikers shifted, uneasy. One of them whispered something too low for Sarah to catch. Jack tapped the counter. She's got a point, he said. We need info, contacts, not empty roads. If we scare everyone, we learn nothing. The bearded biker stepped closer, lowering his voice. We came here because we thought you were losing your edge, he said. Word is you've been going soft, helping her instead of focusing on what matters. Sarah watched Jack's reaction. His gaze hardened. I'm handling it, he said. What matters is what I say matters. Another biker joined in. We're not sure that's enough anymore, he said. Your calls don't feel right. We used to ride free. Now we're stuck here, buying coffee. Jack stood up slowly. Sarah stepped back, her hand resting on the counter's edge. She sensed a confrontation coming. She did not want to fight inside. If you have a complaint, say it straight, Jack said. Otherwise, get moving. The bearded biker glanced around. We want to know where you stand, he said. Are we sticking to the plan, or are you looking out for her now? Sarah's heart pounded. She did not like being caught in the middle. She tried to keep calm. I don't want any trouble. I just don't want you scaring off the few customers I have left. Jack responded without looking at her. Our business doesn't involve her personally. She's just here. We use this place. We move on. That was always the deal. Sarah felt a twist of disappointment. She did not trust Jack, but hearing him speak this way reminded her that he was not her ally. He brought supplies, but he was not doing it for her sake. He had his own reasons. The bearded biker seemed to relax a bit. If that's the case, good, he said. We've got word her husband is sniffing around again. Might bring trouble. We don't want that dragging us down. Sarah's face tightened. He's not welcome here, she said. If he shows up, I'll tell him to leave. Jack nodded. There, you see? She's not on his side. We keep things peaceful. We meet, we leave, and we don't make this place a war zone. Everybody wins. The bikers exchanged glances. One sighed and stepped back. We'll trust your judgment for now, he said, voice reluctant. Sarah swallowed. If you trust his judgment, then let me run the diner. Let me have some normal business. Don't block the door or stare down my customers. She pointed to the booths. If you must stay, sit down, drink coffee, pay, and let people in. One of the bikers laughed. You're bossy, he said, for someone who's stuck with us. Sarah did not smile. I'm trying to keep my place open, that's all. Jack watched her closely. He said nothing for a moment, then addressed the bikers. You heard her. Keep a low profile. We don't need trouble. They grumbled but took seats in the booths. Sarah served them coffee, handing each a mug. She stood by the counter, keeping an eye on them. They drank in silence. After a while, the bearded biker stood again. We'll head out soon, he said to Jack. We got what we needed. Just remember, we're watching. Jack nodded. I know. They paid just enough to cover the coffee and walked out, leaving Jack and Sarah alone again. The diner felt calmer with fewer bodies inside. Sarah moved behind the counter and checked the register. The money was small, but at least it wasn't zero. Jack remained standing by the stool, arms crossed. I didn't mean to sound harsh, he said, but I can't show weakness. They'd walk all over me. Sarah's voice was quiet. I understand, she said, but I need this place to survive. I can't feed my child with threats and promises. Jack looked at her belly, then back at her face. I told them not to mess with you. I'll keep telling them. Give it time. Sarah shook her head. Time doesn't pay my bills. I need paying customers, not just you and a few coins thrown my way. He sighed and pulled out a couple more bills, placing them on the counter. This won't fix everything, but it's what I can do now, he said. Sarah took the money and placed it in the register without a word. She did not thank him. She knew he was doing this for his own reasons. Still, the extra cash would help her buy eggs and maybe some decent meat for the next day. Jack stepped toward the door. "We'll be gone soon," he said. "I'll try to keep them in line." Sarah nodded. "That's all I can ask." He left, and she listened to the sound of his boots fade. After that, the evening passed slowly. No more customers came. She locked up early, tired of waiting for someone who would not appear. She sat in the back room, thinking about her situation. She was trapped between the bikers and her need to survive. She felt the baby move, and her eyes stung from lack of sleep. She decided to rest. Tomorrow might be different. Maybe fewer bikers would show. Maybe a few travelers would stop in for breakfast. She placed a hand on her belly and closed her eyes. Sarah woke before dawn and stepped into the diner's front room. The floor felt cold under her feet. She switched on one dim light and inspected the counters. Everything was as she left it. She set the coffee maker going, then checked the cupboards. With the supplies Jack had brought, she managed to bake a few small pastries. The smell helped calm her nerves. She hoped for at least 1 or 2 honest customers this morning. Around sunrise, a lone traveler came in. He ordered coffee and a pastry, paid in full, and left quickly. Sarah appreciated his presence, short as it was. She tried to focus on the small victories. At least she made a few dollars. Later, she heard footsteps outside, then the door swung open. Her husband stepped in again, looking more desperate this time. His eyes darted around the room as if he expected bikers to jump out at him. Sarah clenched her teeth. "What do you want?" she asked, voice flat. He raised his hands, showing he carried nothing. "I need to talk," he said quietly. "Look, I know I messed up. I know I left you with nothing. But I'm in real trouble now, and those guys—" Sarah cut him off. "You think I care?" she said. "You left me pregnant and broke. Now you want me to help you with those bikers? Why would I do that?" He took a step closer. "Because if they don't get their money, they'll keep using this place. They'll ruin your business. They're already haunting the road. Don't you see? If we work together, maybe we can scare them off or figure something out." Sarah laughed without humor. "You want me to help you trick them? You have nothing to offer me, and I don't trust you." He wiped sweat from his forehead. "They won't stop coming. Jack pretends to be calm, but he's dangerous. We both know that." Sarah shook her head. "I'm not helping you. Get out." She pointed at the door. Before he could protest, the door opened again. Jack appeared, silent at first, followed by one other biker. They saw the husband standing there and spread out, blocking the exit. Her husband backed up, raising his hands in surrender. Jack looked at Sarah. "You called him here?" he asked. She snorted. "No, he showed up on his own again. I told him to leave." Jack turned to the husband. "You're still trying your luck. We gave you enough chances," he said. "You owe us. Pay or disappear." The husband tried to keep his voice steady. "I don't have the money yet. Give me a few more days. I can find it." The biker behind Jack crossed his arms. "We're done waiting." Sarah stepped back, not wanting to get in the middle. Her belly felt heavy, and she was tired of this drama. She looked at Jack. "I don't want to fight in my diner," she said. "Take it outside." Jack nodded. "Outside, then." He jerked his head toward the door, and the biker advanced on the husband. The husband tried to resist, but the biker grabbed his arm and pulled him out. Sarah followed them to the doorway. Outside, the sky was bright, and a dry wind blew. Jack faced the husband a few steps from the entrance. "You want to keep dragging her into this?" he said. "She's not helping you. She made that clear." The husband spat on the ground. "You think you can just push everyone around? You need this diner. You think I don't know that? You're hiding here because you need a safe spot to make deals." Jack's face tightened. "I don't need your advice," he said. "We have our reasons for being here, and none of them involve helping you." The husband glanced at Sarah, trying one last time. "If you help me, we can force them out. Call the police, something." Sarah folded her arms. "I have no reason to trust you, and the police won't come out here for something like this. I'm on my own." Jack nodded in agreement. "She doesn't want you here. I don't want you here. Leave." The husband hesitated, then lunged at Jack in a clumsy attempt. The biker beside Jack caught him, twisting his arm behind his back, making him yelp in pain. Sarah stepped away, her heart pounding. She did not want violence, but she could not feel sorry for the man who abandoned her. Jack stepped closer, speaking quietly, but Sarah could hear every word. "If I see you here again, you'll regret it," he said. "You had your chance to settle your debts. Now it's over." The husband struggled, but the biker's grip held firm. After a few seconds, he gave up and nodded. The biker released him, and he stumbled back, breathing hard. He looked at Sarah, face twisted with anger and fear. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice cracking. "You think they're going to help you? They're using you. You'll see." Then he turned and limped down the road, disappearing behind a curve. Sarah stepped back inside, letting the door swing shut. Jack and the biker followed. She stood behind the counter, running her hand over the surface. Her legs felt weak. "Thanks for keeping it outside," she said quietly. "I can't afford to lose the few things I have inside." Jack nodded. "He's gone," he said. "If he comes back, it won't be pretty." Sarah swallowed. "I don't want him back, but I also don't want you staying here forever." Jack placed a small wad of bills on the counter. "I know. We won't be here forever. Things are changing, maybe sooner than you think." She picked up the money, counting it silently. It was enough to cover her next supply run. She did not know what to say. She just nodded and put the bills in the register. The biker who came with Jack stood by the door, watching outside. Jack turned to Sarah. "You need anything else?" he asked. His tone was calm, almost friendly. Sarah hesitated. "I need space," she said. "Less presence of your group, more normal customers." Jack considered her words. "I'll try," he said. "I can't promise, but I'll try." He signaled to the biker, and they left together. Outside, their bikes started up, then the sound faded. Sarah was alone again. She locked the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. She checked the time. It was still morning. She wondered how many more surprises this day would bring. She thought about what her husband said, about them using her. Of course they were using her, but she had to make do. She unlocked the door after a few minutes and returned to the counter. She had work to do. Maybe she could serve a few travelers this afternoon. She set out the pastries again, hoping the smell would lure someone in. Sarah kept the diner open through the afternoon and into the early evening. She watched the road with a mix of hope and dread. A few cars passed by without stopping. She heated some soup and arranged a couple of sandwiches, just in case someone would show up. Her belly felt heavy, and her feet ached, but she stayed on her feet, determined to keep going. Near sunset, a group of 5 bikers arrived together. They entered without knocking, filling the diner with their presence. Sarah tensed. She recognized some from before, including the bearded one. Jack was not with them. The largest biker stepped forward, hands at his sides, eyes on Sarah. "We're meeting here," he said. "We need the place quiet." Sarah nodded. "You can sit," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But don't scare away the few customers who might come in." She pointed to the booths. "There's coffee if you pay." They grumbled and took seats. One placed money on the table. Sarah poured coffee and brought a plate of biscuits. The bikers talked in low voices, checking the door now and then. She could not catch every word, but she understood they were waiting for Jack. After a few minutes, the door opened again. Jack walked in alone. He glanced at Sarah, then at the group. They watched him closely, shifting on their seats. One biker stood up. "We heard you've been making deals we don't know about," he said. "You keep telling us to wait, but we don't see the point." Jack remained calm. "We're here for a reason," he said. "This place is a spot to find people passing through. Information is valuable. If we scare everyone, we learn nothing." The bearded biker slammed his hand on the table. "We're not interested in waiting around forever," he said. "We want to move on, find real opportunities. Staying here makes no sense." Jack did not raise his voice. "I've got leads. We need to be patient. If we leave now, we get nothing. Sarah listened, busying herself by the counter. She felt their tension. They were challenging Jack. She did not like it. She wanted them gone, but if Jack lost control, this could get worse. She wiped a glass and kept an eye on them. The largest biker pointed at Sarah. "What's with you helping her?" he asked Jack. "We see you bringing supplies, giving her money. Are we running a charity now?" Jack shifted his feet. "I keep her stable so the diner stays open," he said. "If she closes down, we lose a neutral spot. We need a neutral spot to meet contacts. You know that." The bikers muttered among themselves. One leaned forward, speaking quietly. "We don't trust your methods anymore. Some of us think you're too soft." Jack stood very still. "I'm doing what's necessary," he said. "If you have a better plan, say it." They fell silent for a moment. Then the door opened again. Sarah's heart sank as her husband appeared once more. He stayed near the threshold, eyes scanning the room, seeing the full group there. He looked nervous, but determined. Sarah glared at him. "What are you doing here? I told you to stay away." He ignored her and faced the bikers. "I know where you can get your money," he said, voice shaking a bit. "I've got a tip. If you let me go free, I'll tell you." The bikers reacted with interest. One stood up, eyes fixed on him. "Spit it out," he said. Jack raised his hand, stopping them. "You don't get to set terms," he told the husband. "You owe us. You're not in charge here." The husband tried to sound confident. "If I leave empty-handed, you get nothing. If you listen, you might score big. You can leave this diner behind. No more wasting time." Sarah gripped the counter. She wanted him gone. She wanted them all gone. "Don't drag me into your games," she said to her husband. "Don't use my place for your deals." He turned to Sarah. "I'm trying to fix this," he said. "I'm trying to make them leave. Isn't that what you want?" She clenched her jaw. "You only care about yourself." The largest biker stepped toward the husband. "Let's hear it," he said. "Talk now." The husband swallowed hard. "There's a stash of parts and gear up north. Easy pickings. Sell them, pay off debts, make a profit." He tried to sound convincing. "It's enough to cover what I owe and more." The bearded biker narrowed his eyes. This better not be a trick. Jack stood between them and Sarah, as if blocking her from the chaos. He watched the husband carefully. "Why tell us now?" he asked. "Why not run?" The husband shrugged. "I can't outrun you. I figure if I point you to something good, you'll let me walk." Sarah's hands tightened into fists. She wanted him gone. She wanted all of them gone. She felt the baby move inside her, and her patience was running thin. One biker looked at Jack. "If this is real, we can settle our debts and move on," he said. "No need to stay here." Jack's jaw tightened. Sarah noticed. If they moved on, maybe that would solve her problems. But Jack seemed uncertain. He stood there, weighing the options. If he agreed, they would leave her diner and chase this lead. If it was a trap, they might blame him. Sarah stepped forward. "If you're leaving, then leave," she said. "I want my diner back." The bikers ignored her. They waited for Jack's decision. Jack glanced at Sarah, then at the husband. "You lead us there," he said to the husband. "We check it out. If it's good, we settle. If it's not, you pay the price." The husband nodded. "Fine." The bikers seemed eager. The tension eased slightly, replaced by impatience. They wanted to go now. They gathered near the door, talking among themselves, excited by the prospect of a new score. Sarah watched Jack. He walked to the counter and placed a small amount of cash there, enough for some supplies. "Use this," he said quietly to her. "After we're gone, fix the place up. Get your customers back." Sarah did not know how to respond. She looked at the money, then at him. "Just go," she said, "and don't come back." Jack nodded once. He turned to the husband. "Move," he said, leading him and the bikers outside. Sarah followed to the doorway, watching them start their bikes. The husband climbed into a sidecar, surrounded by angry eyes. They revved up and rolled away into the fading light. As the sound of engines faded, the diner fell silent. Sarah stood there, hand on her belly, breathing slowly. They were gone, maybe for good. She had money in the register, some supplies, and an empty diner. It was finally just hers again. She stepped back inside and locked the door. She turned off the neon sign and rested a moment. She felt tension leaving her shoulders. She would rebuild. She would draw customers again. She would manage somehow. For the first time in days, she smiled. The night felt quiet and safe. She sat down at a booth, placing a hand on her belly. The baby would come soon, and maybe now they had a chance at a normal life. Sarah spent the next morning cleaning the diner. She scrubbed the counters, wiped the tables, and swept the floor. Without the constant presence of bikers, the place felt different. She moved slowly, feeling the weight of her belly, but she refused to rest until everything looked better. She replaced a broken napkin holder, rearranged chairs, and checked her stock. She still had some flour and sugar. She decided to bake a fresh batch of biscuits. The scent would help if anyone stopped by. Around midday, a single motorcycle pulled up outside. Sarah stiffened, gripping a towel in her hand. She watched through the window. It was Jack, alone. He got off the bike and stood there a moment, looking at the road. Then he approached the door. Sarah unlocked it and let him in. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Why are you here?" she asked. "I thought you left with the others." Jack removed his helmet and placed it on a stool. "We checked out that lead," he said. "It was worthless. Your husband lied." Sarah nodded. She was not surprised. "So what now?" she asked. She expected Jack to say he would bring the gang back. She stepped behind the counter, keeping some distance. Jack did not sit. "They're angry," he said. "They think I wasted time. They know the husband tricked us. They want payback." Sarah tensed. "I don't want to fight here," she said. "If they come back, I'll close. I can't have this." Jack held up a hand. "They won't come back," he said. "They gave me a choice. Either lead them and find new targets or let them handle it alone. I told them I was done." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean, done?" She crossed her arms. She did not want false hope. Jack looked around the diner. "I walked away," he said. "I left them." His voice was calm, as if stating a simple fact. Sarah looked him over. He wore the same jacket, but something felt different in his stance. "You left them just like that?" she asked. "They'll be angry. They might come after you." He shrugged. "They can try. I told them I'm finished. I have no reason to keep wandering with them." He turned his gaze to the window. They rode off toward the north. "Maybe they'll chase that husband of yours. Maybe they'll find another road. I don't care." Sarah felt a mix of relief and suspicion. "And you're here because—" Jack stepped closer to the counter. "I need a place to start over," he said. "I don't have much, but I can work. I can fix things. Maybe I can help you keep this place running." She watched him carefully. "Why would I trust you?" she asked. "You said you needed my diner for your group. Now you say you left them. Why should I believe that?" Jack pulled a small bundle of tools from a side pouch. "I can fix the jukebox," he said. "I can fix the door hinge that squeaks. I noticed the sign outside is crooked. I'm not promising miracles, but I can make myself useful." Sarah tapped her fingers on the counter. She thought about her options. Without the bikers, maybe she could rebuild the diner's reputation. Having someone around to help might save her some trouble, but trust was hard. Jack waited, saying nothing. She noticed he looked tired. His eyes were not as hard as before. He seemed unsure, but he did not beg. He just stood there, tools in hand, waiting for her answer. Sarah sighed. "If you're serious, fix the jukebox," she said, pointing to the machine in the corner. It had not worked in months. "If you can get it running, maybe I'll believe you." Jack nodded. He walked over, kneeled beside it, and opened a panel with a screwdriver. Sarah watched from a distance. She prepared some coffee and kept an eye on him. He did not ask for help. He just worked, checking wires, adjusting parts. After some time, a faint click sounded. Jack pressed a button and the jukebox's lights flickered. He stood up, tapped it once, and stepped back. The old machine hummed quietly. Sarah stared, surprised. She approached and pressed one of the selection buttons. The mechanism whirred. A scratchy tune started to play, low but distinct. She had not heard that sound in ages. The music was simple and old-fashioned, but it filled the diner with a kind of warmth she had not felt in a long time. Sarah nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "You fixed it. Good start." Jack wiped his hands on a rag. "I can do more," he said. "That outside pump station you never use? Maybe we can turn it into a small gas stop for travelers. Attract more business." She raised her eyebrows. "You know how to do that?" He shrugged. "I know a bit about mechanics and fuel lines," he said. "I can try. If you want more customers, offering fuel might help." Sarah considered the idea. With gas available, more travelers might stop by. She could serve coffee, sandwiches, maybe earn enough to keep going and raise her baby. But working with Jack was risky. She barely knew him. He had been a threat. Now he offered help. She decided to test him further. "If you want to stay, fine," she said. "But you follow my rules. No scaring customers, no biker friends showing up. You pay for what you eat. And if I see any sign you're using me, you're out. Understand?" Jack nodded. "Understood," he said. He did not argue. Sarah felt a small measure of control return. "Then let's start with that gas pump," she said. "I haven't touched it in a long time. If you can get it working, I'll buy some fuel." Jack walked outside without another word. She watched him through the window as he checked the old pump, removed a panel, and examined the dusty gears. She felt unsure, but also curious. If he could get things running, maybe she could rebuild her business before the baby came. While Jack worked outside, a lone traveler in a pickup truck stopped by. Sarah served him a cup of coffee and offered a biscuit. He noticed Jack outside but did not seem afraid. He paid and left a small tip. Sarah's heart lifted a bit. When Jack came back in, he said, "The pump needs parts. I can get them if we can spare a little money." Sarah counted her earnings and the extra bills Jack had given her earlier. "I can manage," she said. "But this better pay off." He nodded. "It will," he said, looking around the diner. "This place can do better." Sarah watched him, still not sure of his intentions, but willing to give it a chance. The jukebox played softly in the background. The air felt calmer, and the fear that had haunted her seemed to fade. She knew there were no guarantees, but at least there was a plan. They spent the rest of the afternoon making a list of what they needed. Sarah planned to drive into town the next day to buy fuel and some parts Jack requested. She would fix the menu board, maybe add a sign by the road advertising gas. Jack said he would help with labor if she handled the costs. As evening fell, Sarah locked the door. She noticed Jack did not leave. He stood by the window, looking at the empty road. She remembered her rules. "Where will you sleep?" she asked. "I have no spare room." He paused. "I can sleep in the shed outside," he said. "I don't need much, just a spot to roll out a mat." Sarah considered this. "All right," she said. "Just don't mess with anything. I keep some tools there." He nodded. "I won't touch what's not mine." She believed him for now. They parted ways for the night, Sarah sleeping in her cramped back room, Jack settling outside. The diner was quiet. She felt relieved that the bikers were gone and that the husband would think twice before returning. She thought about her unborn baby. Maybe things were turning around. Sarah woke up before sunrise. She checked the diner, making sure everything was in order. The floor was clean, the tables were set, and the coffee machine was ready. She felt the baby's weight, but her back hurt less, knowing the bikers were gone. She stepped outside and found Jack tightening a bolt on the gas pump. He had managed to find the parts the day before, and now he worked quietly, determined to get it running. "Morning," Sarah said. Her voice was steady and calm. Jack looked up. "Morning," he replied. "Almost got this working. After this we can fill the tank and put up a sign." Sarah nodded. "I'll paint a sign on a board," she said. "I have some spare wood in the shed. If travelers know we have gas, they'll stop." Jack adjusted a wrench. "Good idea," he said. "I'll set the price fair. just enough to draw people in. Sarah glanced at the road. It was quiet now, no sign of bikers or trouble. She went back inside and mixed flour and sugar to bake fresh biscuits. She brewed coffee and scrambled a few eggs. As the smell spread, she felt more confident. A little after sunrise, a small car pulled up. A man and a woman stepped out, looking curious. Sarah greeted them with a quiet smile. "We have breakfast and coffee," she said, "and soon we'll have gas for sale." They sat at a booth, relaxing. Jack came in, wiping his hands. He gave Sarah a quick nod, then stepped behind the diner to check a pipe he had fixed the night before. He did not talk much to the customers, leaving that to Sarah. She served them coffee and biscuits, and they thanked her, leaving a nice tip. Later, a delivery truck slowed down at the sight of the gas pump being serviced. The driver peeked inside. Sarah explained they were getting it ready and would have fuel next time he passed by. He bought a coffee and some biscuits to go. She appreciated every sale. By midday, Jack had the pump running. Sarah stood beside him as he tested it. A small trickle of fuel poured into a can they had set aside. Jack smiled, a rare expression from him, and Sarah allowed herself a small smile as well. They carried a wooden board to the roadside. Sarah painted simple letters: gas, coffee, food. Jack hammered it into the ground. It was not fancy, but it was clear. They stepped back to admire their work. The sound of a distant truck approached. Maybe soon they would have more customers. In the afternoon, Sarah saw a dusty sedan pull in. The driver stepped out, saw the sign, and asked if they sold gas. Jack nodded, filling the tank carefully. The driver walked into the diner, ordered a sandwich and a soda, and paid without fuss. He even complimented the place. Sarah felt pride stir inside her. The diner was coming back to life. Over the next few days, more travelers stopped by. Nothing dramatic, just a slow trickle of people who needed a break on the road. Some bought gas, some just coffee, but it all added up. Sarah noticed that Jack worked hard. He replaced a broken hinge on the door, fixed a leaking faucet, and helped her rearrange the pantry. He asked for nothing in return except a simple meal at the end of the day. He never touched what was not his. He never raised his voice. When customers asked about him, Sarah just said he was helping out. One afternoon, when business was quiet, Sarah and Jack sat at the counter. She was tired, her belly large, and the baby restless. She sipped water while Jack ate a biscuit. They spoke in low tones. "I wasn't sure about you staying," Sarah said. "But so far, you've done what you promised." Jack nodded. "I'm done with that life," he said simply. "This is a better place than any I've seen. I don't need to keep riding forever." Sarah glanced at the jukebox, which still worked. "I guess we both needed a change," she said. "I need help with this diner, a safe place to raise my baby." Jack set his biscuit down. "I can keep fixing things," he said. "Maybe build a small shelter out back, something more comfortable than that shed." Sarah studied his face. She saw no sign of deceit, just a tired man wanting a quiet life. "If you're willing," she said, "you can stay. But I'm telling you up front, I'm not looking for trouble. If any of your old crew comes by, they find nothing here. Understood?" He nodded. Understood. As days passed, the diner's reputation improved slightly. Truckers spread the word about a small place with gas and decent coffee. The income was still modest, but steady enough. Sarah managed to save a bit of money, enough to consider buying better groceries. She also repaired a broken light in the dining area, making the place brighter. One evening, as the sun set, a family with 2 kids stopped by. They ate sandwiches, drank soda, and listened to a few tunes from the jukebox. The kids laughed, and Sarah felt hopeful. Jack stayed outside, adjusting something on the gas pump. He did not interfere with customers unless asked. This worked well for both of them. After the family left, Sarah locked the door and turned off most lights. She and Jack stood by the window, looking out at the quiet road. The night air was warm, and the stars were visible. Sarah touched her belly. The baby would arrive soon, and this time she would not be alone. She had a safe place, a small income, and a helper who knew how to keep things running. Jack spoke softly. "If you need anything when the baby comes, I can drive you into town," he said. "We can get supplies, maybe even see a doctor if needed." Sarah nodded. She appreciated his offer. "I'll need help," she admitted. "Thank you." She never thought she would thank him, but here she was. They stood there a bit longer, the jukebox silent now, the scent of coffee lingering. Sarah thought about the bikers, the husband, the threats. It felt distant. Now she had a partner who seemed willing to work with her, not against her. She turned away from the window. "I'm going to rest," she said. "We'll open early tomorrow." Jack nodded. "I'll tidy up the shed before I turn in." Sarah walked into the small back room, feeling tired but calm. She lay down, listening to the faint sounds of Jack moving outside. She knew there were still many unknowns, but at least for now, the diner was hers, peaceful and steady. She could raise her child here, serve coffee, sell gas, and maybe build a quiet life. No one knew what the future held, but as long as they kept working, they could manage. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling safe for the first time in a long while.